Well, I remember very well the very first movie I ever watched on DVD when we got rid of those horrible cassette tapes. Well, I actually still had to use them when I got home. I went to a friend's house and watched the first ever DVD I ever saw. It was at the Waters house, if you're familiar with those people at our church. I remember going to their house and watching Toy Story. And it was the most incredible thing that I'd ever seen, to see this animated movie as well. And it was just on a disc, not a big thing. You had like menus and you could pick where you wanted to go and all these incredible things. But I remember very well Toy Story was the movie, and I've probably watched that movie 100 times since. And it'll be one of my favourite movies, even now as an adult, because it's such a good movie. And it's pretty much about this humble toy cowboy Woody. And all the toys can talk and all that sort of stuff. So they're owned by this boy called Andy, and Woody was Andy's favourite. He was like the head toy, the one in charge, the one that was sort of a boss toy, and he was an encourager, he was a leader, he was someone that looked after all the other toys. And in the first 5 minutes of the movie, you're like, this Woody guy is really cool, just the way that he's leading that other group of toys. But then Andy's birthday happens at the start of the movie, and he gets this brand new Space Ranger, top latest toy out there, Buzz Lightyear, who had lights and talking buttons and wings and all of these incredible things, and all of these things that Woody didn't have, because all Woody had was a drawstring that made him say reach for the sky and other little cowboy sayings like that. So this incredible leader Woody, that was inspirational, that was encouraging, that seemed to be just a joy to be around, all of a sudden turned into a resentful, bitter toy, one that was sort of quite nasty towards Buzz, and it goes through the rest of the movie. And he hates Buzz. They don't get along very well, because all Woody could see was everything that Buzz had that he didn't have. So he kept mocking Buzz. He started mocking other of his toy friends that were in the room, because they liked Buzz as well and they thought Buzz was really cool. And all of a sudden Woody, this really encouraging, joyful leader of a toy, was somebody that was pulling others down, resenting others, and just being bitter and being a toy that others didn't want to spend their time around all of a sudden. And that was basically because of jealousy. Woody was jealous. He was jealous, and all he could see in Buzz were the things that he didn't have. He could see all of these features that made Buzz popular, and that all the other toys were admiring in him, and he thinks, I don't have that, so I don't like that. When we switch and now look at our own lives a little bit, we can all be a bit like Woody. We can all fall into jealousy just as easily as Woody. Well, I can, at least. And I imagine many people here are the same. We start to look at what others have that we lack. We look at things like their looks, other people's skills, other people's opportunities, their health, their height, even could be someone's inheritance that they get one day, and we think, oh, wish I could get an inheritance that nice just for just being part of a family or something like that. So we look at those things that other people have that we don't have, and we ourselves get jealous. And as a result, we look at those other people that are getting benefit, or those other people that are doing better at something, and we look at them with haste. We look at them with bitterness. We look at them with grumpiness, and it turns us on the inside into a person that's nowhere near as nice as we were before that particular thing happened that we're jealous of. When this becomes our focus, as a result, ultimately what sort of happens within our mind, what does happen to us a lot, is when we realise these things that we're lacking, instead of blaming the person that is the really maybe good-looking, high-skilled, getting promotions in their job person, we don't look at them and just resent them, which does happen, but we start to blame God a little bit. We can think to ourselves, especially we might think of someone that's tall and athletic, and we think, oh, if only God made me a bit taller and athletic. If only God gave me a passion for music so I could play an instrument really well like the other people that I see at church sometimes. If only God gave me this passion so that I could be better at speaking in front of other people. If only God gave, and we start to blame God for the things that we think that we're lacking. And we, without even noticing, we actually grow a little bit of a resentment towards God, because we weren't created the way somebody else was created. We're not good at something the way somebody else is. Because we think that God should have given what he's given to somebody else. Why didn't God give me what he gave that person that I keep looking at wishing that I had? This leads to resentment towards God, and it leads to resentment towards others. This is why jealousy is such a big issue that we need to confront. This is why jealousy is an enemy of our heart that we need to deal with. Because you see, jealousy is a feeling or showing an envious resentment towards each other. Jealousy hurts relationships. It hurts our relationship with God, and it hurts our relationship with others. You see, every relationship that we have is in some kind of danger unless jealousy is addressed in our life. If we let jealousy just be something that we tolerate, if we let jealousy just be something that we do, every other relationship in our life is going to be at risk. And there's a deeper heart issue at play here. So we want to live lives that strive to be like Jesus. As we want to, if you're a follower of Jesus here today and you want to be more and more like him, if you want to have a heart that's more geared towards being like Jesus, then we need to ensure that we aren't envious of others. We need to ensure that we aren't allowing ourselves to have these emotions that cause us to be bitter and grumpy and resentful towards other people, because it stops us from loving other people well. So we cannot let jealousy rule our heart. But you see, it's the root of an even bigger problem that we have here. You see, for some reason, when we look at our hearts, for some reason, if we're honest about ourselves, if we look at and think about the stuff that we think about and what goes on within us, inside of us, sometimes there's something satisfying about watching someone you're jealous of lose at something, or lose something that you wish you had. There's something satisfying about, maybe there's somebody who you see and you're jealous of them because they're a really strong person. And so all of a sudden they can't lift something that they used to be able to lift, and you're able to lift that. For some reason there's something within us and we're like, oh, that makes me feel pretty good about myself because of that little failure they've got. Oh, that's pretty good. Maybe somebody comes in and they've gained a little bit of weight, something that you're sort of always been a little bit jealous of in your mind, and they're just a little bit bigger than they were last time. And you're just like, oh, that gives me a little bit of a pep up in my step. And our heart, that sounds like a horrible, horrible thing, doesn't it? But I think if we're truly honest with one another, it could just be me. But if we're truly honest, there's times where we've had feelings like that. There's times where we've had thoughts like that. And that's why this is a hard issue that we have to think about. So the solution, though, isn't focusing on others. The solution isn't just thinking, oh, well, the issue is in this. If we just could fix that person in my life, then all of this would be satisfied. Unfortunately, to see the solution for this issue of jealousy, to see the solution for this enemy of our heart, we have to look at ourselves. Problems are so much easier when we don't have to take any responsibility for it. Problems are so much easier when we can just focus on others and blame other people for what's happening. But we need to begin today by looking at ourselves. See, there are many stories in the Bible where relationships have been ruined by jealousy. You could see, especially in the Old Testament when you look through. And right at the start, we see Cain was jealous of his brother Abel. And as a result, he became a murderer. Cain actually killed his brother Abel because of how jealous he was of him. Then we see Esau was jealous of his brother Jacob. And he actually went and stole his birthright, which caused a huge tension in their family and ultimately broke up their family because of what he did. Then we see Jacob's sons were so jealous of their other brother, Joseph, because he was the favourite son. So they actually sold their brother Joseph into slavery. You see what jealousy is causing these people to do? It's causing them to do horrible, horrible things. It's causing them to have the worst brought out in them. And we see example after example in the Bible. Someone who probably had the most right to be jealous, though, someone who probably had the most right of anyone to be jealous was James. You see, because James was the half-brother of Jesus. And I reckon it'd be pretty hard being the brother of Jesus, because we're still saying 2,000 years later how perfect Jesus is, and James was the brother of Jesus, who we never talk about being perfect. So can you imagine being the brother of Jesus and the amount of jealousy that he perhaps had to deal with? Yet at least from the small glimpse we get of James in his life, in the book that he wrote in the Bible, it doesn't seem like he has any signs of jealousy in his life. Perhaps we see the good reflection and lessons he's learnt from this, so we're getting his wisdom. But it seems like there was no jealousy within James, and he at least knows how to be able to handle it. And he shares incredible amounts of wisdom in the letter he wrote in the first century that we have in our Bibles today. So at one point in this letter, James starts speaking of the battle we have within us. This battle that causes fights, that causes quarrels, and he gives to help us fix it. And we see this in James chapter 4, verses 1 to 3. And he starts with a question. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from the desires that battle within you? You desire but do not have, so you kill. You covet but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. When you ask, you do not receive because you ask with the wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. So James starts, he presents the question. He says, what causes fights and quarrels among you? And do we stop and reflect on the cause of these problems that we may have with other people? How often when you have a fight or a quarrel, or even in your mind you're thinking a bit of resentment towards someone, do you ever actually stop and think, why am I feeling this? Why am I getting a bit of joy when somebody else fails a little bit in my life? What is actually causing me to feel like this? How often do we actually stop and analyse these emotions that are going on inside of us? And that's what James is trying to cause us to do here. He's saying, what causes this? We need to look within ourselves to work out what it is that's causing us. But then James goes on and he sort of makes it sound like we know the answer already, because the way he says, don't they come from the desires that battle within you? He's like, you know this, don't they come from this idea, these desires, from what's happening within you? He identifies that our external problems are caused by what's happening internally. He recognises that battle of when we're having those moments in our minds saying, oh, we need to be bitter towards that person, or we don't like this because of what's happening to that person. He's trying to get down to the heart issue that is at play here. And he tells us to look within ourselves. He says, we desire, but we do not have. We covet, yet we can't get what we want, so we quarrel and we fight. We are the problem. I am the problem is sort of how we need to look at this when we look at it ourselves. And people hate taking responsibility for a problem. I know I don't like taking responsibility for a problem. I used to be the king of excuses when I was young. There's something that creeps into me every now and then, but it's something where something happens, I'm like, oh, I need to think of an excuse for why I did this. I need to think of an excuse so I can get out of trouble, or so that I'm not a part of the problem at play here. You see, the truth is, until I can own my share of the problem, I'll always blame the other person. The truth is, until we share our part of the problem, we'll always blame the other person. So I know we see so many people who hate to take credit for a problem that's happening. And you get two people in the room and they'll think they did it and they did it. You get a group of people and they'll say, well, it's that person's fault or that person's fault. But you never get anywhere to the root of a problem until people start to take credit for the part of blame that they play in it. So as we look at the core issues at play here in our relationships, it often comes down to not getting what we want. Not getting what we want. And it's annoying when I remember reading this and looking at what James is talking about in this, and when we look at this idea of it's about us not getting what we want, I'm like, oh, I'm not a toddler. But it's funny how when we're still adults, we still, in some ways, we quarrel, we fight, we still deal with issues of not getting what we want. We're still very selfish people when we get to adulthood. We get to make our own decisions, and it all happens over and over again. You see, we lack what our hearts desire, so we cause trouble. We carry on, we complain, we quarrel. That could be externally, it could be internally. We think poorly about other people. We get a little bit happy when someone doesn't go the way that they wanted something to go. We get happy when someone who doesn't get what they wanted. See, these are the issues that are battling within us because we're not getting what we want. So James offers an interesting solution here that we get to look at. He says, you do not have because you do not ask God. And it's an interesting statement that he makes here. Because does that mean all we have to do is ask God and we'll get whatever we want? That sounds like a pretty cool life, doesn't it? But I can tell you there are a lot of things that I've never received in prayer, especially when I was a teenage boy growing up trying to work out what prayer was all about. And I realised very quickly that I didn't get everything I wanted, and I wouldn't like to think what my life would have been like if I did get all of what I wanted. Probably would have had a nice car, a big mansion, all sorts of electronics, and I would never have had to get a job. Would have been a great life. But God doesn't work that way because God loves you too much to give you everything you ask for. It's a typo there. But God loves you too much to give you everything you ask for. Can you imagine what your life would actually look like if God gave you everything you asked for? And can you imagine serving a God who gave you everything you asked for? We'd probably turn into even more selfish people than what our human nature makes us today. So James is quick to point about this point. He doesn't sit it there. He keeps going and he says, when you ask, you do not receive because you ask with the wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. So he points it out pretty quickly. If you're not asking with the right motives, if you're asking for something just so that you can spend that time on your pleasures, then you're not going to get what you pray for, if that's the heart behind your prayer. So James clearly knows what it means to be human. He's clearly experiencing the same tensions within us. James is smart enough to see that the reason God doesn't answer all our prayers is because we are often praying and asking with selfish motives. We are the barrier. We are the problem. So we see this first part of James, he really identifies, all he's trying to say is we are selfish people who are the main cause of a lot of the problems that we have in our own life. So we need to deal with ourselves. We need to sort ourselves out. This second part of James from verse 7, he starts addressing how we can do that. And he starts, submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. Come near to God and he will come near to you. Wash your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Grieve, mourn, and wail. Change your laughter to mourning, your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord and he will lift you up. You see, God wants it all brought to him. He wants us to submit ourselves to God. All our problems, all our hard issues, he wants us to not take out on other people, but he wants us to give those things to God. The problem is submission is rarely talked about today. Submission's a word we don't hear much because people today don't like to submit to anything. We don't like to submit under anyone, to anyone, so we especially don't want to submit to God because he's the one that will see us for completely who we are, isn't he? Yet the only way to truly be cured of ourselves is to submit to someone far greater than ourselves. Submission to God. So we hate that idea because it means that we aren't in charge. It means there's something else in our world. It means there's someone else in our world that we have to dictate our decisions by. And it causes us to have to analyse and examine our own motives. You see, we need to take all of our problems, all of our burdens, all of our heart issues to God. Not take them all out on others. Not take them out on the people around us, not looking just to be right as often as we can. And not to sulk and moan if we don't get our own way, but submit to God, to take our issues to God. So we must submit to God, and James doesn't stop here. He doesn't just put out, we must submit to God, but he continues. He says, resist the devil and he will flee from you. How are you resisting the devil in your life? How are you resisting evil in your life? So are you tolerating the thoughts in your mind, the feelings in your heart that you know are destructive? When these feelings of jealousy that go on in our mind, are you tolerating them and letting them be something that stays a part of your mind? Or is it something that you're making sure you get a hold of? Is it something that you're giving to God? So you know those feelings that we get when someone that you have in jealousy, as I said, maybe they've put on a bit of weight. Maybe they've failed at something. What are you doing to resist these parts of you that has a little bit of joy when you see that in your life? That's what it looks like in these instances to flee from the devil. If you're tolerating those thoughts that pop up in your mind, if you're tolerating those emotions that pop up in your mind and letting them fester, letting you be nastier towards that person, letting you not like that person as much in your mind, even if you don't show it externally, if you're tolerating those sort of things, that's when we're tolerating evil. That's when we're doing the opposite of fleeing from the devil because we're letting our mind take us to darker and darker places. And the more we tolerate thoughts like that in our mind, the worse of a place it'll take us and the worse of a person it'll eventually make us be because of how we'll react to other people. So that's a real practical way to think about what it means to flee the devil in this instance. Yet as we flee, we need to run towards something. So I love to see the image when we're fleeing from the devil, when we're fleeing from those thoughts that he's trying to grab onto, when he's putting jealousy and anger and greed and guilt, all of these issues we've been talking about in our life, as we're trying to run from those, we need to run towards something as well. But that's when we want to be drawing near from God. I always see it as this idea of running away from the devil and towards God. Or you could look at it on the vertical, running away from the devil and towards God. Not tolerating those thoughts that bring us down, but trying to think of ways that we can glorify God and give those thoughts to him so they can bring out something instead. James calls us to wash our hands and purify our hearts. I think that idea of wash is very important here because we need to clean and get rid of those dirty thoughts in our mind. And when I say dirty thoughts, I'm not talking about in a pornographic sense or anything like that. Just things like being jealous and greedy and those kind of thoughts that cause us to put ourselves ahead of even thinking about anyone else that might be in our world. Are you willing to address these issues that we've talked about in the past month? Are you willing to rid your life of the anger, of the greed, of the guilt, of the jealousy? Are you taking the parts of you that you know you aren't healthy, that you know are not emotionally healthy to God? How are you giving them and submitting them to God in your life? James finishes with a final plea. He says to humble ourselves before the Lord. He says that we must be willing for God to do a work in us. And what's interesting here is Peter, he was an apostle of Jesus. He was one of Jesus' best mates who got to spend the most time with Jesus in his life, echoes the exact same thoughts that he says in 1 Peter chapter 5, where he says, humble yourselves therefore under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. That's incredible. Even when you see that second part where it says, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. So anxiety is a huge issue in the world at the moment. I know just working with young people, anxiety is everywhere, but it's also in so many adults. And the freedom that comes with knowing we can cast our anxiety on him brings so much freedom. But we're looking at two issues here. We're sort of looking at one a bit closer, and then we're sort of looking at them all a step back as we wrap up this series, Enemies of the Heart. We're looking at this idea of jealousy. And jealousy causes us to think that God owes us something, that person got it, so he owes me that thing as well. And as we've looked at all of these different heart issues, we've been looking at different remedies that we get towards these things. So what is the remedy to jealousy? How do we conquer jealousy in our life so we don't get all of these thoughts that make us feel ill towards other people? You see, the remedy to jealousy is celebration. The remedy for jealousy is celebration. There is not enough celebration in this world, especially towards an individual. You might get celebration when we are victorious at something, or we win something, or we're a part of something that goes well. But I don't think there's near enough celebration in this world towards a particular individual. Even things like cancel culture, the whole world looks to do the opposite. When we wait for somebody to trip over a little bit or say the wrong thing, and then everybody through the media jumps on that one thing that they said and never celebrate the good things or forget everything that they ever celebrated in a person's life. You see, the way to fight the issue of jealousy, the way to fight those things that are causing us those resentment and bitter feelings in our life is to celebrate. Celebrate that person. When your mind starts to get jealous, and I'm sure you're aware of it, when you really think about this idea of the thoughts and feelings that you have, when you see you're starting to have thoughts of jealousy, emotions of jealousy kick in, when you're frustrated because someone's doing a little bit better at something than you are, don't let yourself get jealous at it, but celebrate it. Verbally celebrate it. Encourage them for them. Tell them you notice something different. Tell them I notice you've lost that little bit of weight. I've noticed you're doing extra well on that assignment that I'm not doing well in. I notice that you're doing really good in the sport that I'm playing. I notice that you sing way better than I sing. And don't compare yourself when you celebrate them for it, but just say you're really good at X, Y, Z, fill in the blank. And this will be something that you have to fight against your own desires for it. This is sort of where the battle within us begins. But when those moments of jealousy, celebrate it. Just think, I'm feeling jealous towards that person. I'm going to say how good I think they are at that particular thing they're doing. I'm going to say, you know what, I think it's so good that you got that great result in that test, like I just said a moment before. And if we do it over and over again, we can actually train our minds so it becomes not the last thing we think about, but the first thing we think about. If we find a way that we can make sure that we celebrate every time we're jealous of something, it'll eventually train our mind to think that way towards people. Because our minds can literally be trained to celebrate as a first reaction instead of jealousy. It won't happen overnight, but we need to think and work hard so that we can celebrate. You see, we need to do this because the actual problem is withheld celebration. Withheld celebration is a problem. When we withhold celebrating because of our jealousy, that's a problem. It means we're failing to encourage someone. We're failing to lift someone up. I'd even go as far as saying we're failing to love someone because of the withheld celebration. Because jealousy causes us to not want to give them those good feelings. Jealousy causes us to not want to, lift them up and be able to encourage them in that way. And it can cause us to do so many horrible things. See, jealousy can rob you of so much joy in your life. My wife's a bit of an inspiration when I see this one. She's a really good celebrator and always good encourager to other people. And when we were trying to have a kid, it took us a few years to be able to get to that point where we have kids. And being in a young adults ministry at church, and not just at church, but just being young adults in the same age when lots of people have kids, that all of a sudden it seems like you go from having 21sts and weddings and all that fun stuff to everyone's just having baby announcements and boring baby showers and that sort of stuff. I just generally don't like baby showers, that's why I say boring. But and there's opportunities there for jealousy. There's opportunities there to think, I don't think it's fair that person's getting that and I'm not getting that. But my wife's an inspiration because time after time after time, she'd celebrate that and be so joyous whenever she saw an announcement and be sure to get around those people. You see, because jealousy has the potential to rub us so much in our life. And I know so many other people would have it so much more rougher in so many other areas like that, particularly when it comes to children. But what happens is the devil sort of grabs onto those thoughts that we're having. The devil sort of grabs on when someone's having joy where we can't get joy, He robs us of any sort of joy of having in it and just causes us to get resentful and bitter towards those things. So we need to use celebration to fight those kind of things in our life. Jealousy can rob us of so many things in our life. So even if you don't feel like celebrating, even if you think celebrating is the last thing you want to do it anyway, would be the practical application here. Celebrate until you feel like it. See, expressing truth helps free you from the emotional bondage that is part of jealousy. So I don't think God's ever going to condemn you for celebrating something that someone else has done when it's in a good, positive way like that. Expressing truth helps free you from the emotional bondage that's part of jealousy. So as I said, though, there's sort of two issues at play. That's sort of a specific application on this idea of jealousy. We've looked at a number of hard issues over the last 4 weeks here. We've looked at facing anger, greed and guilt in our life, and today jealousy. And these are horrible emotions that can come in and they can take over our life. They can fill us and turn us into quite horrible people. I know there's times where I sort of look at myself and there's times I think, oh, gee, I wish people didn't know what I was really like on the inside, when you know your mind can be full of these sort of emotions. So as we draw a close to this end of a series, we have to ask, how is my heart? How is your heart? Do you need to check your heart? Do you need to perhaps open yourself up to heart surgery? Are you getting all your heart desires, or are you just giving your heart whatever it wants? See, our human response to this is just to satisfy our desires. We think, oh, I want something, I'm going to get it. So we complain, we get bitter, and our hearts can actually become a toxic part of us, because our hearts can actually fill with these kind of things. Just because it's from the heart doesn't necessarily seem it's a good thing. Some people think that idea of, oh, just listen to your heart and it's going to be definitely good. But we have to rid ourselves of those emotions for that to be true. You see, because satisfying our desires never truly satisfies. In a really good book that I recommend everyone read, Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis says, the more you feed an appetite, the more it escalates in intensity. Appetites grow through indulgence, not neglect. There is something else we are truly made to yearn for in this world. Even though there's so many things that we can indulge on in this world, there is only one thing that will ever truly sustain us. So many things in this world we'll just want more and more and more. But the only thing that will truly sustain us is Jesus. The only thing that will truly sustain and give our heart what it truly needs is connecting with Jesus, is drawing near to God. Like James says, draw near to God and he will draw near to you. We've looked at this series of all the different relational dynamics at play, that God owes me, but somebody else owes me. It's all this idea of owing someone something. That's sort of the root cause behind some of these problems, and who owes who, and I'm owed something, because we think we're owed so many things. The amazing power of the gospel, the amazing power of the story of Jesus going to the cross and dying for us, is that we are owed nothing. The reality is we are actually owed nothing in this world, because we are all sinners. We've all fallen short of God's glory. We all deserve nothing but death. That sounds horrible and pretty morbid from the front, but that's the reality. We all deserve death. Yet Jesus didn't want that to happen. Jesus didn't want us to die. He wanted us to be with him eternally in heaven. And usually I'll go through the gospel and the way I talk about the gospel here, but this week I wanted to fit in a quote from Tim Keller, because Timothy Keller died after a long battle with cancer, and he was just an incredible wise man who wrote so many great books. If you saw some of his books, you'd probably know him. But the way Tim Keller describes the gospel is this. He says, the gospel is that I am so sinful that Jesus had to die for me, yet so loved and valued that Jesus was glad to die for me. This leads to deep humility and deep confidence at the same time. I can't feel superior to anyone, and yet I have nothing to prove to anyone. See, God gave us what we didn't deserve. We were owed nothing, but God gave us everything that we weren't owed anyway. He gave us the opportunity for eternal life. He gave us the opportunity to live this life the way we want to live. And now we've got this option to decide if we want Jesus to be the king of our life or not the king of our life. This is why we must draw near to God. He gave us his all, everything. And in return, he asked for us to draw near to him. Our response needs to be to take our eyes off ourselves and what we want and seek him in all that we do. And we'll have this battle within us day after day when we're trying to seek his ways. And sometimes as we've got this battle, when we're trying to chase after God and resist the devil, there'll be times where we stumble and it'll feel like we're not resisting the devil at all. But we need to remember to keep getting back up and chasing after God, to submit our problems to God. And more often than not, it won't be external issues that are happening. It'll be all the different things that are happening internally inside of us. How are you approaching Jesus? It says in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 16, it says, "Let us approach God's throne with grace and confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need." That's incredible. But after all Jesus has done, as God has created this world, he still tells us in his word to approach his throne with confidence. How are you approaching Jesus? Do you need to address some things in your life to better follow him? Have you allowed yourself to be completely consumed by yourself? Which leads to all of these deceptions and horrible emotions that can bring out the worst in us. We're about to have a time of communion. And the reason I wanted to finish with communion today was because communion's about a time where we do examine our hearts. We look at how we are living in light of how God called us to live. We look at how we're living in light that Jesus gave his life for us and how we're honouring the sacrifices he made. So in a few moments I'm going to pray and we're going to have this time of communion where we remember Jesus. We remember what he did for us, but we also examine our hearts. Paul talks about in Corinthians when he's talking about communion and the Lord's Supper, he talks about examining our motives behind that, examining our hearts and seeing where we are in that moment. So as we have this time of communion in a moment, we have the bread and the grape juice to remember Jesus. We have the bread and the grape juice to remember the sacrifice he made for that. But in this time that we have, use this to examine your heart. As you come before the Lord like we do in communion, use it to examine your heart. Because what are the parts of your heart that you know that you're having issues with? What are the parts in your mind that you know keep pulling you down? Is jealousy something that you have a huge problem with in your life? You know, jealousy causes you to be robbed of so much joy and great things in your life. Maybe guilt is something that's completely grabbed a hold of you and it's causing you to not be able to draw near to God in a powerful way. Maybe greed has robbed you of so many chances in your life, it's just caused you to fuel your selfish desires and just made you think more and more about yourself. And maybe anger has just caused you inside your mind to just be angry towards so many different people. You see, there's so many different emotions that play in our mind that we need to conquer and examine our hearts. What are these parts of your heart that you need to focus on and conquer in your life? So in just a moment, I'm going to pray and we're going to have this time just to focus on that. We're going to have this time just to focus on Jesus and getting our hearts right before him. And then we'll just go straight into our final song. It's From the Inside Out. And the lyrics pretty much talk about God fixing us from the inside out to consume our hearts so that we can love him from the inside out, so we can completely give our hearts to the Lord. And during that last song, I'm just going to stand over near the baptistry. And you might be someone here and you know you struggle with some of these enemies of the heart. You're like, I can't handle this myself. This has been consuming me for a long, long time. Please come and receive prayer if you want to, or we can catch up during the week, or we can link you with other people from our church that can help you with that. But if you think you need extra prayer for a hard issue that you know is just stopping you from connecting with God properly, please come and speak to me just during that last song. But I'm going to pray and then we're going to go into that time of worship where we give our hearts to God. We examine our hearts and we can lift up as we finish this series. And we say, God, take these enemies of the heart away from me. Father, we just thank you. We just thank you for who you are, for what you do in our lives. We just thank you that you gave your life for us. And we just pray during this time of communion, Lord, that we can focus on you. Help rid our hearts of the emotions that pull us back. Help rid our hearts of the things that cause us to be people that are not of you. Help us to be instead people filled with love. People want to celebrate everything in this world. But we want to bring so much celebration in this life that we bring joy to other people and that we bring the joy of you to others. We just pray now that as we focus on your sacrifice, that you can use that to show us that we need to be drawn closer to you. Help us in this time to submit to you, to submit all our heart's desires completely to you, Lord.